most fundamental level, human beings strive to have impact. I think we would all agree that impact matters. And personally, I'm pretty convicted that human beings are fundamentally optimistic creatures and that we're focused largely on having a positive impact on the world around us. I think positive impact is correlated with personal and professional happiness. The more positive impact we have as humans, the better the world becomes, the better we become, the better everything becomes, I think, in short. And I think positive impact is just, in short, how we make the world a better place. And I think if we agree on that, then there's two choices. You can either be the one that does the impact, or you can enable the impact. This presentation will be focused on how we can enable that impact. And I believe that rather than focusing on partnering with the real economy, we can focus on having an alternative financial system with crypto and Web3 that we can use to enable impact in a more efficient, transparent, equitable, and impactful way. So now we kind of understand why we want to enable impact, why that's a good thing to do, but what about Web3 and how does that help us achieve our goals? So lots of different definitions of Web3, but personally, I believe that Web3 is pretty synonymous with blockchains, and blockchains can be defined in a few ways, but I would say private keys owning public states. And I'm going to jot through a few key characteristics here of blockchains that I think are particularly relevant when it comes to deploying capital for impact. First of which is decentralization. Blockchains are not controlled, like Ethereum or Cosmos, are not controlled by a single entity. They are decentralized, and this has huge implications because no one can censor what you do, and no one can stop what you do. It's a resilient network that exists in a decentralized way, and this is super, super important when we think about supporting impactful work. Another key characteristic is permissionlessness. This means anyone can access it at any time. For example, in the US, so when a bank account, you need to be documented, for example. Anyone with a pulse and access to the internet can now spin up a crypto wallet, and that provides huge opportunities for folks that are otherwise marginalized or just like excluded from the traditional system for various reasons. Public blockchains are also transparent by default, so you can see the status and movements of funds and also digital identities. You can see all the public states. This has a few really big implications. I think you brought up a really good point about transparency for what? I guess if the underlying data is corrupted or if it's kind of nonsense, then transparency doesn't mean that much. But I think compared to the traditional financial system, which is generally the wealthiest have the most privacy and the poorest have the least privacy, I think Web3 and blockchains offer an alternative to that, which I think is pretty important. Additionally, there's lots of privacy tools that are available, such as Tornado Cash, which sadly has been sanctioned by the US government. But there's lots of innovation happening that will allow people to essentially move funds around in a fully anonymous way, which is really important for a lot of impactful purposes. The fourth piece here is censorship resistance. This, I think, is probably the biggest reason why you'd want to use a blockchain to support impactful work. Basically, the banks will censor you. The banks and the government will censor you if you do things that they don't like. For example, in Ukraine, when the Ukraine war happened, a DAO had to emerge called Ukraine DAO in order to funnel funds there because the government shut down banks. The government will shut down your bank account if they don't like what you're doing. And I think a lot of impactful work happens at the fringes and happens for folks that are marginalized by these governing bodies. And I think we need a resilient, decentralized, censorship resistance way to support those projects and people. The last piece is I would say it's objectively better, but that's probably just my own opinion. So some key examples that kind of put those into action, paying people and projects in different regions in a permissionless and censorship-resistant way. Ukraine DAO is a great example of this. When the Ukraine war happened, this DAO emerged to be able to funnel funds to folks that were kicked out of their typical and normal banking account and infrastructure. So Ukraine DAO was able to help crowdfund and support people that were kicked off of the financial rails. Another example is, let's say you want to support mutual aid work that's happening in Cuba. You Venmo your friend in Cuba who's doing mutual aid work. You say Cuba in the Venmo description. Venmo will take that money and then basically suspend or permanently ban your account. Currently, with the financial systems that we have, we just cannot support work that happens in sanctioned countries or countries that are in need that conflict with the U.S. interests. So Ukraine DAO is a great example of that in action. Another example is Constitution DAO. Constitution DAO was a fun experiment where a bunch of people across the globe kind of pooled together in a decentralized way to try and bid on a copy of the U.S. Constitution. Ultimately, it didn't work, sadly, but I think it proved that it's possible for people to come together, pool capital, and have collective action in a really impactful way. And it doesn't take too much a stretch of imagination to imagine scenarios where people may pool capital to reclaim land, for example, to buy resources together. And I think we'll see a lot more experimentation in the next few years when it comes to pooling capital. Another example is participatory grants programs. We have one of those at Gitcoin where we use a mechanism called quadratic funding to try and fund projects in a way that takes into account the collective intelligence of people who benefit from those projects. And there's also Optimism, which is a layer 2 on Ethereum that has a retroactive public goods funding project where they are trying to essentially have impact equal profit. And the way that they do that is they retroactively reward projects that have a high impact. So these are some key examples that played up, but there's plenty more. These are just a few that I think capture some of the principles well. To learn more about some of the impactful work we've done at Gitcoin and some of the projects that we've supported, such as Tornado Cash, you can go view our new impact report at impact.gitcoin.co. So far, we've distributed about 50 million funds to projects that really use Web3 and crypto to make the world a better place. And we've had over 3.8 million donations so far. So now what? So we kind of learned why impact matters. We learned about some of these opportunities of blockchain, some of the projects doing interesting stuff. But what can we do now? And I think the best thing to do now is to support these projects that are doing this work. You can go kind of donate the public goods on Gitcoin grants. We're going to have a beta round that launches on April 25th, where we'll have a few different funding rounds for core infrastructure, for climate solutions, for DEI and community projects as well. So I'd encourage folks to check that out on April 25th, gitcoin.co, and support public goods in that way. You can vote for retroactive public goods funding projects on Optimism. You can see which projects you believe in the Ethereum ecosystem have had that best impact. And you can vote with your Optimism tokens, and then they will get retroactively funded based on how many people think that their impact was noteworthy. And you can give crypto to your favorite nonprofit on endowment. If you go to endowment, I think it's .com or .org, you can basically create a crypto address for your favorite nonprofit and then send funds to that address. It really opens up the barrier for anyone to be able to give funds to these nonprofits, and they're doing really outstanding work. I think overall, though, there's been a lot of exciting things that have happened, but we need more experiments. I think if there's any call to action here, it would be think about the ways in which blockchains are resilient and censorship resistance, and think about the impactful work happening, and just come up with some interesting experiments for how we can best support that work. And if you do, let me know. Gitcoin will try and fund you, give you some money to make it happen. But yeah, we just need more experiments because I think there's lots of ways in which the world can be improved. And I think crypto is a really, really important piece of the puzzle. I think very often crypto gets a bad rep because of a lot of Ponzi schemes. I think candidly, like 99% of crypto stuff is like not that noteworthy. But I think what I tried to highlight here is the 1%. And I think the 1% is really, really special. The 1% of meaningful work is really, really special and worth taking count of. And I think it can like change the world for the better. And there's so much more that we can do. So I kept this at like 10 minutes and I'll end a little bit early and have time for questions, or we can go on to the next person. But yeah, thank you guys.